The 3 snake leaves. There was once a time a poor man who could no longer support his only son. Then said the son, "Dear father, things go so badly with us that I am a burden to you. I would rather go away and see how I can earn my bread." So the father gave him his blessing, and with a great sorrow took leave of him. At this time the king of a mighty empire was at war, and the youth took service with him and went out to fight. And when he came before the enemy, there was a battle, a great danger, and it rained shot until his comrades fell on all sides. And when the leader also was killed, those left were about to take flight. But the young youth stepped forth, spoke boldly to them, and cried, "We will not let our fatherland be ruined." Then the others followed him, and he pressed on and conquered the enemy. When the king heard that he owed the victory to him alone, he raised him above all the others, and gave him great treasures, and made him the first in the kingdom. The king had a daughter who was very beautiful, but she was also very strange. She had made a vow to take no one as her lord and husband who did not promise to let himself be buried alive with her if she died first. "If he loves me with all his heart," said she, "of what use will life be to him afterwards?" On her side she would do the same, and if he died first, would go down to the grave with him. This strange oath had up to this time frightened away all wooers, but the youth became so charmed with her beauty that he cared for nothing, but asked for her father for her. "But do you know what you must promise?" said the king. "I must be buried with her," he replied, "if I outlive her. But my love is so great that I do not mind the danger." Then the king consented, and the wedding was solemnized with great splendor. They lived now for a while happy and contented with each other, and then it befell that the young queen was attacked by a severe illness, and no physician could save her. And as she lay there dead, the young king remembered what he had been obligated to promise, and was horrified at having to lie down alive in the grave. But there was no escape. The king had placed sentries at all the gates, and it was not possible to avoid his fate. As the day came when the corpse was to be buried, he was taken down with it into the royal vault, and then the door was shut and bolted. Near the coffin stood a table on which were 4 candles, 4 loaves of bread, 4 bottles of wine, and when this provision came to an end, he would have to die of hunger. And now he sat there full of pain and grief, ate every day only a little piece of bread, drank only a mouthful of wine, and nevertheless saw death daily drawing near. Whilst he thus gazed before him, he saw a snake creep out of the corner of the vault and approach the dead body. And as he thought it came to gnaw at it, he drew his sword and said, "As long as I live you shall not touch her," and hewed the snake in 3 pieces. After a time, a second snake crept out of its hole, and when it saw the other lying dead, cut in pieces, it went back. But soon it came again with 3 green leaves in its mouth. Then it took the 3 pieces of the snake, laid them together as they fitted, and placed one of the leaves on each wound. Immediately the severed parts joined themselves together, the snake moved and became alive again, and both of them hastened away together. The leaves were left laying on the ground, and a desire came into the mind of the unhappy man who had been watching all of this, to know if the wondrous power of the leaves which had brought the snake back to life again could not likewise be of service to a human being. So he picked up the leaves and laid one of them on the mouth of his dead wife, and the 2 others on her eyes. And hardly had he done this than the blood stirred in her veins, rose to her pale face, and colored it again. Then she drew breath, opened her eyes, and said, "Ah, God, where am I?" "You are with me, dear wife," he answered, and told her how everything had happened, and how he had brought her back again to life. Then he gave her some wine and bread, and when she had regained her strength, he raised her up, and they went to the door and knocked, and called so loudly that the sentries heard it, and told the king. The king came down himself and opened the door, and there he found both strong and well, and rejoiced with them that now all sorrow was over. The young king, however, took the 3 snake leaves with him, gave them to a servant, and said, "Keep them for me carefully, and carry them constantly about you. Who knows in what trouble they might yet be of service to us?" But a change had taken place in his wife. After she had been restored to life, it seemed as if all love for her husband had gone out of her heart. After some time, when he wanted to make a voyage over the sea to visit his old father, and they had gone on aboard a ship, she forgot the great love and fidelity which he had shown her, and which had been the means of rescuing her from death, and conceived a wicked inclination for the skipper. And once when the young king lay there asleep, she called in the skipper, and seized the sleeper by the head, and the skipper took him by the feet, and thus they threw him down into the sea. When the shameful deed was done, she said, "Now let us return home, and say that he died on the way. I will extol and praise you so to my father, that he will marry me to you, and make you the heir to his crown." But the faithful servant, who had seen all they did, unseen by them, unfastened a little boat from the ship, got onto it, and sailed after his master, and let the traders go on their way. He fished up the dead body, and by the help of the 3 snake leaves which he carried about with him, and laid on his eyes and mouth, he fortunately brought the young king back to life. They both rowed with all their strength day and night, and their little boat sailed so swiftly that they reached the old king before the others. He was astonished when he saw them come alone, and asked what had happened to them. When he learnt the wickedness of his daughter, he said, "I cannot believe that she has behaved so ill, but the truth will come soon to light," and bade both to go into a secret chamber and keep themselves hidden from everyone. Soon afterwards the great ship came sailing in, and the godless woman appeared before her father with a troubled continuance. He said, "Why did you come back alone? Where is your husband?" "Ah, dear father," she replied, "I come home again in great grief. During the voyage my husband became suddenly ill and died, and if the good skipper had not given me his help, it would have gone ill with me. He was present at his death, and can tell you all." The king said, "I will make the dead alive again," and opened the chamber, and bade the 2 to come out. When the woman saw her husband, she was thunderstruck, and fell on her knees and begged for mercy. The king said, "There is no mercy. He was ready to die with you, and restored you to life again, but you have murdered him in his sleep, and shall receive the reward that you deserve." Then she was placed with her accomplice in a ship which had been pierced with holes, and sent out to sea, where they soon sank amid the waves. The White Snake. A long time ago there lived a king who was famed for his wisdom through all the land. Nothing was hidden from him, and it seemed as if news of the most secret things was brought to him through the air. But he had a strange custom. Every day after dinner, when the table was cleared, and no one else was present, a trustworthy servant had to bring him one more dish. It was covered, however, and even the servant did not know what was in it. Neither did anyone know, for the king never took off the cover to eat it until he was quite alone. This had gone on for a long time, and when one day the servant, who took away the dish, was overcome with such curiosity that he could not help carrying the dish into his room. When he had carefully locked the door, he lifted up the cover, and saw a white snake lying on the dish. But when he saw it, he could not deny himself the pleasure of tasting it, so he cut off the little bit and put it into his mouth. No sooner had it touched his tongue than he heard a strange whispering of little voices outside his window. He went and listened, and then noticed that it was the sparrows who were chattering together, and telling one another of all kinds of things which they had seen in the fields and woods. Eating the snake had given him power of understanding the language of animals. Now it so happened that on this very day the queen lost her most beautiful ring, and suspicion of having stolen it fell upon this trusty servant, who was allowed to go everywhere. The king ordered the man to be brought before him, and threatened him with angry words that unless he could before the morrow point out the thief, he himself would be looked upon as guilty and executed. In vain he declared his innocence. He was dismissed with no better answer. In his trouble and fear he went down into the courtyard, and took thought of how to help himself out of this trouble. Now some ducks were sitting together quietly by a brook, and taking their rest, and whilst they were making their feathers smooth with their bills, they were having a confidential conversation together. The servant stood by and listened. They were telling one another of all the places where they had been waddling about all the morning, and what good food they had found. And one said in a pitiful tone, "Something lies heavy on my stomach. As I was eating in the haste, I swallowed a ring which lay under the queen's window." The servant at once seized her by the neck, carried her to the kitchen, and said to the cook, "Here is the fine duck, pray, kill her." "Yes," said the cook, and weighed her in his hand. "She has spared no trouble to fatten herself, and has been waiting to be roasted long enough." So he cut off her head, and as she was being dressed for the spit, the queen's ring was found inside her. The servant could now easily prove his innocence, and the king, to make amends for the wrong, allowed him to ask a favor, and promised him the best place in the court that he could wish for. The servant refused everything, and only asked for a horse and some money for traveling, as he had a mind to see the world and go about a little. When his request was granted, he set out on his way, and one day came to a pond, where he saw 3 fishes caught in the reeds and grasping for water. Now though it is said that fishes are dumb, he heard them lamenting, that they must perish so miserably, and as he had a kind heart, he got off his horse and put the 3 prisoners back into the water. They leapt with delight, put out their heads, and cried to him, "We will remember you and repay you for saving us." He rode on, and after a while it seemed to him that he heard a voice in the sand at his feet. He listened, and heard an ant-king complain, "Why cannot folks, with their clumsy beasts, keep off of our bodies? That stupid horse with his heavy hoofs has been treading down my people without mercy." So he turned on to a side path, and the ant-king cried out to him, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." The path led him into a wood, and here he saw 2 old ravens standing by their nest, and throwing out their young ones. "Out with you, you idle, good-for-nothing creatures," cried they. "We cannot find food for you any longer. You are big enough, and can provide for yourselves." But the poor young ravens lay upon the ground, flapping their wings, and crying, "Oh, what helpless chicks we are! We must shift for ourselves, and yet we cannot fly. What can we do but lie here and starve?" So the good young fellow alighted and killed his horse with his sword, and gave it to them for food. Then they came hopping up to it, satisfied their hunger, and cried, "We will remember you. One good turn deserves another." And now he had to use his own legs, and when he had walked a long way, he came to a large city. There was a great noise and crowd in the streets, and a man rode up on horseback, crying aloud, "The king's daughter wants a husband, but whoever seeks her hand must perform a hard task. If he does not succeed, he will forfeit his life." Many had already made the attempt, but in vain. Nevertheless, when the youth saw the king's daughter, he was so overcome by her great beauty that he forgot all danger, and went before the king, and declared himself a suitor. So he was led out to the sea, and a gold ring was thrown into it before his eyes. Then the king ordered him to fetch this ring up from the bottom of the sea, and added, "If you come up again without it, you will be thrown in again and again until you perish amid the waves." All the people grieved for the handsome youth. Then they went away, leaving him alone by the sea. He stood on the shore and considered what he should do, when suddenly he saw 3 fishes come swimming towards him, and they were the very fishes whose lives he had saved. The one in the middle held a mussel in its mouth, which had laid on the shore at the young youth's feet, and when he had taken it up and opened it, there lay the gold ring in the shell. Full of joy, he took it to the king, and expected that he would grant him the promised reward. But when the proud princess perceived that he was not her equal in birth, she scorned him, and required him first to perform another task. She went down into the garden, and strewed with her own hands 10 sacks full of millet seed on the grass. And she said, "Tomorrow morning before sunrise, these must be picked up, and not a single grain be wanting." The youth sat down in the garden, and considered how it might be possible to perform this task, but he could think of nothing, and there he sat sorrowfully, awaiting the break of day, when he should be led to death. But as soon as the first rays of the sun shone into the garden, he saw all the 10 sacks standing side by side, quite full, and not a single grain was missing. The ant king had come in the night with thousands and thousands of ants, and the graceful creatures had by great industry picked up all the millet and seed and gathered them into the sacks. Presently the king's daughter herself came down into the garden, and was amazed to see that the young man had done the task she had given him. But she could not yet conquer her proud heart, and said, "Although he has performed both the tasks, he shall not be my husband until he has brought me an apple from the tree of life." The youth did not know where the tree of life stood, but he set out, and would have gone on forever as long as his legs would carry him, though he had no hope of finding it. After he had wandered through the 3 kingdoms, he came one evening to a wood, and lay down under a tree to sleep. But he heard a rustling in the branches, and a golden apple fell into his hand. At the same time 3 ravens flew down to him, perched themselves upon his knee, and said, "We are the 3 young ravens whom you saved from starving, when we had grown big, and heard that you were seeking the golden apple. We flew over the sea to the end of the world, where the tree of life stands, and have brought you the apple." The youth, full of joy, set out homewards, and took the golden apple to the king's beautiful daughter, who had no more excuses left to make. They cut the apple of life in 2 and ate it together, and then her heart became full of love for him, and they lived in an undisturbed happiness to a great age. The Valiant Little Tailor. One summer's morning, a little tailor was sitting on his table by the window. He was in good spirits, and sewed with all his might. Then came a peasant woman down the street, crying, "Good jams, cheap! Good jams, cheap!" This rang pleasantly in the tailor's ears. He stretched his delicate head out the window and called, "Come up here, dear woman. Here you will get rid of your goods." The woman came up 3 steps to the tailor with her heavy basket, and he made her unpack all the pots for him. He inspected each one, lifted it up, put his nose to it, and at length said, "The jam seems to me to be good. So weigh me out 4 ounces, dear woman, and if it is 1/4 of a pound, that is of no consequence." The woman, who had hoped to find a good sale, gave him what he desired, but went away quite angry and grumbling. "Now, this jam shall be blessed by God," cried the little tailor, "and give me health and strength." So he brought the bread out of the cupboard, cut himself a piece right across the loaf, and spread the jam over it. "This won't taste bitter," said he, "but I will just finish the jacket before I take a bite." He laid the bread near him, sewed on, and in his joy made bigger and bigger stitches. In the meantime, the smell of the sweet jam rose to where the flies were sitting in great numbers. They were attracted, and descended on it in hosts. "Hi, who invited you?" said the little tailor, and drove the unbidden guests away. The flies, however, who understood no German, would not be turned away, but came back again in ever-increasing companies. The little tailor at last lost all patience, and drew a piece of cloth from the hole under his work-table, and saying, "Wait, and I will give it to you," struck it mercilessly on them. When he threw it away and counted, there lay before him no fewer than 7, dead with the legs stretched out. "Are you a fellow of that sort?" said he, and could not help admiring his own bravery. The whole town should know of this, and the little tailor hastened to cut himself a girdle, stitched it, and embroidered on it in large letters, 7 at one stroke. "What, the town?" he continued. "The whole world shall hear it," and his heart wagged with joy like a lamb's tail. The tailor put on the girdle, and resolved to go forth into the world, because he thought his workshop was too small for his valor. Before he went away, he sought about in the house to see if there was anything which he could take with him. However, he had found nothing but old cheese, and that he put in his pocket. In front of the door he observed a bird which had caught itself in the thicket. It had to go into his pocket with the cheese. Now he took to the road boldly, and as he was light and nimble, he felt no fatigue. The road led him up to a mountain, and when he had reached the highest point of it, there sat a powerful giant, looking peacefully about him. The little tailor went bravely up, spoke to him and said, "Good day, comrade. So you are sitting there, overlooking the widespread world. I am just on my way thither, and want to try my luck. Have you any inclination to go with me?" The giant looked contemptuously at the tailor, and said, "You ragamuffin, you miserable creature." "Oh, indeed," answered the little tailor, and unbuttoned his coat, and showed the giant the girdle. "There may you read what kind of man I am." The giant read 7 at one stroke, and thought that they had been men whom the tailor had killed, and begun to feel a little respect for the tiny fellow. Nevertheless he wished to try him first, and took a stone in his hand and squeezed it together so that the water dropped out of it. "Do that likewise," said the giant, "if you have strength." "Is that all?" said the tailor. "That is a child's play with us," and put his hand into his pocket, brought out the softest cheese, and pressed it until the liquid ran out of it. "Faith," said he, "that was a little better, wasn't it?" The giant did not know what to say, and could not believe it of the little man, when the giant picked up a stone and threw it so high that the eye could scarcely follow it. "Now, little mite of a man, do that likewise." "Well thrown," said the tailor, "but after all the stone came down to earth again. I will throw you one which shall never come back at all." And he put his hand in his pocket, took out the bird, and threw it into the air. The bird, delighted with its liberty, rose and flew away and did not come back. "How does that shot please you, comrade?" asked the tailor. "You can certainly throw," said the giant, "but now we will see if you are able to carry anything properly." He took the little tailor to a mighty oak tree, which lay there felled on the ground, and said, "If you are strong enough, help me carry the tree out of the forest." "Readily," answered the little man. "Take the trunk on your shoulders, and I will raise up the branches and twigs. After all, they are the heaviest." The giant took the trunk on his shoulder, but the tailor seated himself on a branch, and the giant, who could not look around, had to carry away the whole tree and the little tailor into the bargain. He behind was quite merry and happy, and whistled the song. 3 tailors rode forth from the gate, as if carrying the tree were child's play. The giant, after he had dragged the heavy burden part of the way, could go no further, and cried, "Hark you! I shall have to let the tree fall." The tailor sprang nimbly down, seized the tree with both arms as if he had been carrying it, and said to the giant, "You are such a great fellow, and yet cannot even carry the tree." They went on together, and as they passed a cherry tree, the giant laid hold of the top of the tree where the ripest fruit was hanging, bent it down, and gave it into the tailor's hand, and bade him to eat. But the little tailor was much too weak to hold the tree, and when the giant let it go, it sprang back again, and the tailor was tossed into the air with it. When he had fallen down again without injury, the giant said, "What is this? Have you not strength enough to hold the weak twig?" "There was no lack of strength," answered the little tailor. "Do you think that could be anything to a man who has struck down 7 at one blow? I leapt over the tree because the huntsmen were shooting down there in the thicket. Jump as I did if you can do it." The giant made the attempt, but could not get over the tree, and remained hanging in the branches, so that in this also the tailor kept the upper hand. The giant said, "If you are such a valiant fellow, come with me into our cavern, and spend the night with us." The little tailor was willing, and followed him. When they went into the cave, other giants were sitting there by the fire, and each of them had roasted sheep in his hand, and was eating it. The little tailor looked round and thought, "It is much more spacious here than in my workshop." The giant showed him a bed, and said he was to lie down in it and sleep. The bed, however, was too big for the little tailor. He did not lay down in it, but crept into a corner. When it was midnight, and the giant thought that the little tailor was lying in a sound sleep, he got up, took a great iron bar, cut through the bed with one blow, and thought he had finished off the grasshopper for good. With the earliest dawn the giants went into the forest, and had quite forgotten the little tailor, when all at once he walked up to them quite merrily and boldly. The giants were terrified. They were afraid that he would strike them all dead, and ran away in a great hurry. The little tailor went onwards, always following his own pointed nose. After he had walked for a long time, he came to the courtyard of a royal palace, and as he felt weary, he lay down on the grass and fell asleep. Whilst he lay there, the people came and inspected him on all sides, and read on his girdle, 7 at one stroke. "Ah," said they, "what does the great warrior here in the midst of peace? He must be a mighty lord." They went and announced him to the king, and gave it as their opinion that if the war should break out, this would be the weighty and useful man who ought on no account to be allowed to depart. The counsel pleased the king, and he sent one of his courtiers to the little tailor to offer him military service when he awoke. The ambassador remained standing by the sleeper, waited till he stretched his limbs and opened his eyes, and then conveyed to him his proposal. "For this reason I have come here," the tailor replied. "I am ready to enter the king's service." He was therefore honorably received, and a special dwelling was assigned to him. The soldiers, however, were set against the little tailor, and wished him 1,000 miles away. "What is to be the end of this?" said they among themselves. "If we quarrel with him, and he strikes about him, 7 of us will fall at every blow. Not one of us can stand against him." They came therefore to a decision, betook themselves in a body to the king, and begged for their dismissal. "We are not prepared," said they, "to stay with a man who kills 7 at one stroke." The king was sorry that for the sake of one he should lose all his faithful servants, wished that he had never set eyes on the tailor, and would willingly have been rid of him again. But he did not venture to give him his dismissal, for he dreaded lest he should strike him and all his people dead, and place himself on the royal throne. He thought about it for a long time, and at last found good counsel. He sent to the little tailor, and caused him to be informed that as he was such a great warrior, he had one request to make of him. In a forest of his country lived 2 giants who caused great mischief with their robbing, murdering, ravaging, and burning, and no one could approach them without putting himself in danger of death. If the tailor conquered and killed these 2 giants, he would give him his only daughter to wife, and half of his kingdom as a dowry. Likewise 100 horsemen should go with him to assist him. "That would be indeed a fine thing for a man like me," thought the little tailor. "One is not offered a beautiful princess and half a kingdom every day of one's life." "Ah, yes," he replied, "I will soon subdue the giants, and do not require the help of the 100 horsemen to do it. He who can hit 7 with one blow has no need to be afraid of 2. The little tailor went forth, and 100 horsemen followed him. When he came to the outskirts of the forest, he said to his followers, "Just stay waiting here. I alone will soon finish off the giants." Then he bounded into the forest and looked about right and left. After a while he perceived both giants. They lay sleeping under a tree, and snored so that the branches waved up and down. The little tailor, not idle, gathered 2 pockets full of stones, and with these climbed up to the tree. When he was halfway up, he slipped down by a branch until he sat just above the sleepers, and then let one stone after another fall into the breast of one of the giants. For a long time the giant felt nothing, but at last he awoke, pushed his comrade, and said, "Why are you knocking me?" "You must be dreaming," said the other. "I am not knocking you." They laid themselves down to sleep again, and then the tailor threw a stone down on the second. "What is the meaning of this?" cried the other. "Why are you pelting me?" "I am not pelting you," answered the first, growling. They disputed about it for a time, but as they were weary, they let the matter rest, and their eyes closed once more. The little tailor began his game again, picked out the biggest stone, and threw it with all his might on the breast of the first giant. "That is too bad," cried he, and sprang up like a madman, and pushed his companion against the tree until it shook. The other paid him back in the same coin, and they got in such a large rage that they tore up the trees and belaboured each other so long that at last they both fell down dead on the ground at the same time. Then the little tailor leapt down. "It is a lucky thing," said he, "that they did not tear up the tree on which I was sitting, or I should have had to spring on to the other like a squirrel, but we tailors are nimble." He drew out his sword and gave each of them a couple of thrusts in the breast, and then went out to the horsemen and said, "The work is done. I have finished both of them off, but it was hard work." They tore up trees in their sore need, and defended themselves with them, but all that is to no purpose when a man like myself comes, who can kill 7 at one blow. "But you are not wounded?" asked the horseman. "You need not concern yourself with that," answered the tailor. "They have not bent one hair of mine." The horsemen would not believe him, and rode into the forest. There they found the giants swimming in their blood, and all round about lay the thorn-up trees. The little tailor demanded of the king the promised reward. He, however, repented of his promise, and again bethought himself how he could get rid of the hero. "Before you receive my daughter and the half of my kingdom," said he to him, "you must perform one more heroic deed. In the forest roams a unicorn which does great harm, and you must catch it first. I fear one unicorn still less than 2 giants. 7 at one blow is my kind of affair." He took a rope and an axe with him, and went forth into the forest, and again bade those who were sent with him to wait outside. He had not long to seek. The unicorn soon came towards him, and rushed directly on the tailor, as if it would gore him with its horn without more ado. "Softly, softly, it can't be done as quickly as that," said he, and stood still and waited until the animal was quite close, and then sprang nimbly behind the tree. The unicorn ran against the tree with all its strength, and struck its horn so fast in the trunk that it had not strength enough to draw it out again, and thus it was caught. "Now I have got the bird," said the tailor, and came out from behind a tree and put the rope around its neck, and then with his axe he hewed the horn out of the tree, and when all was ready he led the beast away and took it to the king. The king still would not give him the promised reward, and made a third demand. Before the wedding the tailor was to catch him a wild boar that made a great havoc in the forest, and the huntsmen should give him their help. "Willingly," said the tailor, "that is child's play." He did not take the huntsmen with him into the forest, and they were well pleased that he did not, for the wild boar had several times received them in such a manner that they had no inclination to lie in wait for him. When the boar perceived the tailor, it ran on him with a foaming mouth and whetted tusks, and was about to throw him to the ground, but the hero fled and sprang into a chapel which was near, and up to the window at once, and in one bound out again. The boar ran in after him, but the tailor ran round outside and shut the door behind it, and then the raging beast, which was much too heavy and awkward to leap out of the window, was caught. The little tailor called the huntsmen thither, that they may see the prisoner with their own eyes. The hero, however, went to the king, who was now, whether he liked it or not, obliged to keep his promise, and gave him his daughter and half of his kingdom. Had he known that it was no warlike hero, but a little tailor who was standing before him, it would have gone to his heart still more than it did. The wedding was held with great magnificence and small joy, and out of a tailor a king was made. After some time the young queen heard her husband say in his dreams at night, "Boy, make me a doublet, and patch the pantaloons, or else I will wrap the yard measure over your ears." Then she discovered in what state of life the young lord had been born, and the next morning complained of her wrongs to her father, and begged him to help her to get rid of her husband, who was nothing else but a tailor. The king comforted her and said, "Leave your bedroom door open this night, and my servant shall stand outside, and when he has fallen asleep shall go in. Bid him, and take him on board a ship which shall carry him to the wide world." The woman was satisfied with this, but the king's armor-bearer, who had heard all, was friendly with the young lord, and informed him of the whole plot. "I'll put a screw into that business," said the little tailor. At night he went to bed with his wife at the usual time, and when she saw that he had fallen asleep, she got up, opened the door, and then lay down again. The little tailor, who was only pretending to be asleep, began to cry out in a clear voice, "Boy, make me the doublet, and patch me the pantaloons, or I will wrap the yard measure over your ears. I smote 7 at one blow, I killed 2 giants, I brought away 1 unicorn and caught a wild boar, and I am to fear those who are standing outside the room." When these men heard the tailor speaking thus, they were overcome by a great dread, and ran as if the wild huntsmen were behind them, and none of them would venture anything further against him. So the little tailor was, and remained, a king to the end of his life. Cinderella. The wife of a rich man fell sick, and as she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, be good and pious, and then the good God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." Thereupon she closed her eyes and departed. Every day the maiden went out to her mother's grave and wept, and she remained pious and good. When winter came, the snow spread a white sheet over the grave, and by the time the spring sun had drawn it off again, the man had taken another wife. The woman had brought with her into the house 2 daughters, who were beautiful and fair of face, but vile and black of heart. Now begun a bad time for the poor stepchild. "It is the stupid goose to sit in a parlor with us," said they. "He who wants to eat bread must earn it. Out with the kitchen wench." They took her pretty clothes away from her, put an old grey bedgown on her, and gave her wooden shoes. "Just look at the proud princess, how decked out she is," they cried, and laughed, and led her into the kitchen. There she had to do hard work from morning till night, get up before daybreak, carry water, light fires, cook and wash. Besides this, the sisters did her every imaginable injury. They mocked her, and emptied her peas and lentils into the ashes, so that she was forced to sit and pick them out again. In the evening, when she had worked till she was weary, she had no bed to go to, but had to sleep by the hearth in the cinders. And as on that account she always looked dusty and dirty, and they called her Cinderella. It happened that the father was once going to the fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Beautiful dresses," said one. "Pearls and jewels," said the second. "And you, Cinderella," said he, "what will you have?" "Father, break off for me the first branch which knocks against your hat on your way home." So he bought beautiful dresses, pearls and jewels for his 2 stepdaughters, and on his way home, as he was riding through the green thicket, a hazel twig brushed against him and knocked off his hat. Then he broke off the branch and took it with him. When he reached home, he gave his stepdaughters the things which they had wished for, and to Cinderella he gave the branch from the hazel bush. Cinderella thanked him, went to her mother's grave, and planted the branch on it, and wept so much that the tears fell down on it and watered it. And it grew and became a handsome tree. Thrice a day Cinderella went and sat beneath it, and wept and prayed, and a little white bird always came on the tree, and if Cinderella expressed a wish, the bird threw down what she had wished for. It happened, however, that the king gave orders for the festival which was to last 3 days, and to which all the beautiful young girls in the country were invited, in order that his son might choose himself a bride. When the 2 stepsisters heard that they too were to appear among the number, they were delighted, called Cinderella and said, "Comb our hair for us, brush our shoes and fasten our buckles, for we are going to the wedding at the king's palace." Cinderella obeyed, but wept, because she too would have liked to go with them to the dance, and begged her stepmother to allow her to do so. "You go, Cinderella," said she, "covered in dust and dirt as you are, and would go to the festival. You have no clothes and shoes, and yet would dance." As, however, Cinderella went on asking, and stepmother said at last, "I have emptied a dish of lentils into the ashes for you. If you have picked them out again in 2 hours, you shall go with us." The maiden went through the back door into the garden, and called, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds beneath the sky, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." Then the 2 white pigeons came in the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at last all the birds beneath the sky came withering and crowding in, and alighted amongst the ashes. And the pigeons nodded with their heads and began pick, 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 and the rest began also pick, 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 and gathered all the good grains into the dish. Hardly had 1 hour passed before they had finished, and all flew out again. Then the girl took the dish to her stepmother, and was glad, and believed now that she would be allowed to go with them to the festival. But the stepmother said, "No, Cinderella, you have no clothes and you cannot dance. You would only be laughed at. And as Cinderella wept at this, the stepmother said, "If you can pick 2 dishes of lentils out of the ashes for me in 1 hour, you shall go with us." And she thought to herself that she most certainly cannot do again. When the stepmother had emptied the 2 dishes of lentils amongst the ashes, the maiden went through the back door and into the garden and cried, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds beneath the sky, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." Then 2 white pigeons came in by the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at length all the birds beneath the sky came whirling and crowding in, and alighted amongst the ashes. And the doves nodded with their heads and began to peck, 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 and the others began also, peck, 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 and gathered all the good seeds into the dishes. And before half an hour was over, they had already finished, and all flew out again. The maiden was delighted, and believed that she might now go with them to the wedding. But the stepmother said, "All this will not help. You cannot go with us, for you have no clothes and cannot dance. We should be ashamed of you." On this, she turned her back on Cinderella, and hurried away with her 2 proud daughters. As no one was now at home, Cinderella went to her mother's grave beneath the hazel tree, and cried, "Shiver and quiver, little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." Then the bird threw a gold and silver dress down to her, and slippers embroidered with silk and silver. She put on the dress with all speed, and went to the wedding. Her stepsisters and the stepmother, however, did not know her, and thought she must be a foreign princess, for she looked so beautiful in the golden dress. They never once thought of Cinderella, and believed that she was sitting at home in the dirt, picking lentils out of the ashes. The prince approached her, took her by the hand, and danced with her. He would dance with no other maiden, and never let loose of her hand, and if anyone else came to invite her, he said, "This is my partner." She danced till it was evening, and then said she wanted to go home. But the king's son said, "I will go with you and bear you company," for he wished to see to whom the beautiful maiden belonged. She escaped from him, however, and sprang into the pigeon house. The king's son waited until her father came, and then he told him that the unknown maiden had leapt into the pigeon house. The old man thought, "Can it be Cinderella?" And they had to bring him an axe and a pickaxe, that he might hew the pigeon house to pieces. But no one was inside it, and when they got home, Cinderella lay in her dirty clothes among the ashes, and a dim little oil lamp was burning on a mantelpiece. For Cinderella had jumped quickly down from the back of the pigeon house, and had run to the little hazel tree, and there she had taken off her beautiful clothes, and laid them on the grave, and the bird had taken them away again. And then she had seated herself in the kitchen amongst the ashes in her grey gown. Next day, when the festival began afresh, and her parents and her stepsisters had gone once more, Cinderella went to the hazel tree and said, "Shiver and quiver, my little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." Then the bird threw down much more beautiful dress than on the preceding day, and when Cinderella appeared at the wedding in this dress, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The king's son had waited until she came, and instantly took her by the hand and danced with no one but her. When others came and invited her, he said, "This is my partner." When evening came, she wished to leave, and the king's son followed her and wanted to see into which house she went. But she sprang away from him and into the garden behind the house. Therein stood a beautiful tall tree on which hung the most magnificent pears. She clambered so nimbly between the branches like a squirrel that the king's son did not know where she had gone. He waited until her father came and said to him, "The unknown maiden has escaped from me, and I believe she has climbed up into the pear tree." The father thought, "Can it be Cinderella?" and had an axe brought and cut the tree down, but no one was in it. And when they got into the kitchen, Cinderella lay there among the ashes, as usual, for she had jumped down on the other side of the tree, and had taken the beautiful dress to the bird on the little hazel tree, and put on her grey gown. On the third day, when the parents and sisters had gone away, Cinderella went once more to her mother's grave, and said to the little tree, "Shiver and quiver, my little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." And now the bird threw down to her a dress which was more splendid and magnificent than any she had yet, and the slippers were golden. And when she had went to the festival in the dress, no one knew how to speak for astonishment. The king's son danced with her only, and if anyone invited her to dance, he said this was my partner. When evening came, Cinderella wished to leave, and the king's son was anxious to go with her, but she escaped from him so quickly that he could not follow her. The king's son, however, had employed a ruse, and had caused the whole staircase to be smeared with pitch, and there, when she ran down, had the maiden's left slipper remained stuck. The king's son picked it up, and it was small and dainty, and all golden. Next morning he went with it to the father, and said to him, "No one shall be my wife, but she whose foot this golden slipper fits." Then were the two sisters glad, for they had pretty feet. The eldest went with the shoe into her room, and wanted to try it on, and her mother stood by, but she could not get her big toe into it, and the shoe was too small for her. Then her mother gave her a knife and said, "Cut the toe off. When you are queen, you will have no more need to go on foot." The maiden cut the toe off, forced the foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. Then he took her on his horse as his bride, and rode away with her. They were obliged, however, to pass the grave, and there, on the hazel tree, sat the two pigeons, and cried, turn and peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe it is too small for her, the true bride waits for you." Then he looked at her foot, and saw how the blood was trickling from it. He turned his horse round, and took the false bride home again, and said she was not the true one, and that the other sister was to put the shoe on. Then this one went into her chamber, and got her toes safely into the shoe, but her heel was too large. So her mother gave her a knife, and said, "Cut a bit off of your heel. When you are queen, you will have no more need to go on foot." The maiden cut a bit off of her heel, forced her foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. He took her on his horse as his bride, and rode away with her. But when they passed by the hazel tree, the two pigeons sat on it, and cried, turn and peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe it is too small for her, the true bride awaits for you." He looked down at her foot, and saw how the blood was running out of her shoe, and how it had stained her white stockings quite red. Then he turned his horse, and took the false bride home again. "This also was not the right one," said he. "Have you no other daughter?" "No," said the man. "There is still a little stunted kitchen wench, which my late wife left behind her, but she cannot possibly be the bride." The king's son said he was to send her up to him, but the mother answered, "Oh no, she is much too dirty. She cannot show herself." But he absolutely insisted on it, and Cinderella had to be called. She first washed her hands and face clean, and then went and bowed down before the king's son, who gave her the golden shoe. Then she seated herself on a stool, drew her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe, and put it into the slipper, which fitted like a glove. And when she rose up, and the king's son looked at her face, he recognized the beautiful maiden who had danced with him, and cried, that this is the true bride. The stepmother and the two sisters were horrified, and became pale with rage. He, however, took Cinderella into his horse, and rode away with her. As they passed by the hazel tree, the two white doves cried, turn and peep, no blood is on the shoe. The shoe is not too small for her, the true bride rides with you." And when they had cried that, the two came flying down, and placed themselves on Cinderella's shoulders, one on the right, one on the left, and remained sitting there. When the wedding with the king's son was to be celebrated, the two false sisters came, and wanted to get into favor with Cinderella, and share her good fortune. When the betrothed couple went to church, the elder was at the right side, and the younger at the left, and the pigeons pecked out one eye from each of them. Afterwards, as they came back, the elder was at the left, and the younger was at the right, and then the pigeons pecked out the other eye from each. And thus, for their wickedness and falsehood, they were punished with blindness all their days.